Hey everyone, Chris Carter here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. We'll get to what happened in the playoffs, but we got to talk about why signs continue to point to Justin Fields as the Steelers quarterback in 2025 and how they need to build around them with an early look at some of the Senior Bowl targets the Steelers should be taking a closer look at. All here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show in your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Super Bowl 59 is here, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. All right, Steelers fans, the weekend is over. It is Senior Bowl week, which it's always crazy to me how fast that comes back around, but we will get to Senior Bowl targets, who the Steelers should be looking at, some players that I've picked out in my early stages of doing my NFL draft research. We'll get to all of that at some point in the show. For those who don't know, Senior Bowl, of course, just a big earlier stage in the draft process of figuring out players who should be looked at. But I want to talk first about the Steelers quarterback situation. We've talked a lot about why it is and why I think it is, but I continue to look at why it just continues to add up like it's going to be Justin Fields, who's the Steelers quarterback in 2025, unless something drastic happens and there's an implosion somewhere or they fall in love with somebody in the draft. But it's looking that way. First, as we've said for a while now, structurally, it just makes more sense for the Steelers to go with Justin Fields in 2025 as the run game didn't materialize in 2024. And when it didn't, Russell Wilson got figured out in an offense that was averaging over 28 points per game over his first 5 or 6 games with the Steelers, didn't score more than 17 points in their last 5 games in the season. That just can't happen moving forward. Fields' mobility and play style is going to give the Steelers a quarterback who can mitigate when the offensive line isn't playing well, and what's still going to be a young offensive line. Broderick Jones in his 3rd year, but he'll still be younger than both Zach Frazier, Mason McCormick, and Troy Fautanu. You're hoping Fautanu can come back. You're still going to need this line to figure out how to play things. And even if they are a much better unit next year, there's going to be times when they run into trouble, and you're going to need a quarterback whose athleticism and youth can help them kind of mitigate those situations better than Russell Wilson could. And that's why I think Justin Fields is going to be the guy for the Steelers next year. But on top of that, a big goal for this team was to be able to finally make the run game a more consistently efficient and featured part of the offense. But with the young players in the offensive line, you're going to need to buy them time to figure this out. As we talked about before, Marquise Pouncey, David DeCastro did not become first team All-Pro players overnight. Though Pouncey did arrive on the scene very quickly and make a name for himself. But it took a while for that great Steelers offensive line of the 2010s to really form and become that unit that protected Ben Roethlisberger and opened up a lot of holes for Le'Veon Bell. And so you still are in the early stages, I'd say, of that developing. And if you're in the early stages of that developing, it would be wise to not have to make moves at quarterback, banking on that to happen. And I think Russell Wilson was a player that you needed that to happen for him to be effective. You need the strong defense and the run game, and then Russell Wilson becomes a really good piece for you there. But on top of the obvious reasons, there were small hints that Fields may already be the team's plan. First, while we discussed Russell Wilson, he won on the Pat McAfee show last week, and he was kind of playing the game, saying, he's in early talks, but that's what a pending free agent is going to say. I think he's going to do that. And it's nothing against Russ doing that at all. As we said on this show, and I've said on the North Shore Drive podcast, I talked about this with Brian Batko last week. We don't take that as meaning the Steelers are actually in contact in talks right now to sign him to some long-term deal. I think that's not the case. Second, Justin Fields, and I put very an asterisk on this to not take this too literally, but Justin Fields did post a picture of himself from a Steelers game in Steelers uniform, on Instagram, saying with the caption year 2, insinuating he's going to run it back with the Steelers. Typically, I don't take Instagram posts to mean a whole lot by itself, but I think a lot of things are adding up for the Steelers to be like, this makes a lot more sense than trying to do it. Justin Fields probably won't cost them a whole lot. He was, a backup for most of the season. And I think that there's a sense that, hey, they probably want to give him a shot in conjunction with everything else that we're seeing here. And I think it's also important to remember, why Justin Fields got pulled early in the season. One, he even said himself he wasn't playing well enough, and he needed to play better. And something I pointed out was he wasn't seeing the field that well. But I also think another part of this factored in, and it's that when the Steelers signed Russell Wilson in 2024, it was before they knew Kenny Pickett would want to leave because they signed him. When they traded Kenny Pickett away after they signed Russell Wilson, then they traded for Fields, brought him in. I could definitely see part of the agreement that once they signed Russell Wilson, that, oh yeah, you're the starter, that's what it's going to be. And that kind of weighed in on him playing in more in the 2024 season, which again, early on, it looked like the right call. It turned out not to be the right call in the final 5 weeks of the season. But this year, I don't think there are any promises. It's probably just like, hey, this is what you're working with. And I think this can allow you to say, like, hey, if, you want to go younger, you want to get that athletic quarterback, which Mike Tomlin keeps talking about is a big emphasis in the NFL. You can do that. And now you can properly plan your offense to be more suited for Justin Fields' skills. And I think that's something that the Steelers offense wasn't necessarily last year. I think Justin Fields was kind of placed in an offense that was kind of built to be a run-first option that worked off of play action, and that it was built for Russell Wilson, but Justin Fields just kind of fit his way in there. And I think, again, he did a solid job. We gave him a ton of good marks on the year. I'm still putting together all my total grades. We're going to do that soon. Don't worry, when we do our stars and skulls and total up who had the better marks on the year that is coming. But if you remember, my grades on Justin Fields was rather complimentary several times this year for what he was able to put together. So I think that without there being promises made, it might be an easier situation for Justin Fields to come into. Now, there's another sign now that this isn't concrete, but I think it just continues to add to the equations as far as like how I see things could play out, with now Pete Carroll being the Raiders head coach. Now, that doesn't mean that definitely, Russell Wilson's just going to go running off to Las Vegas and that's where he's going to go. But Russell Wilson wants to play somewhere. He wants to start somewhere. And I could see if the Steelers were like, hey, Russ, we appreciate your efforts last year, but if you're here, it's going to be a real competition with Justin Fields. I could see Russell Wilson being like, thanks, guys, I'm going to go with my old head coach where there is no competition. And, maybe that allows Pete Carroll to not have to draft a quarterback super early in the first. And they can go get a key playmaker at another position, offensive line, defensive line, corner, whatever it is that they want to go for. I could see something like that working out. I'm not guaranteeing that that's going to happen, but there's a little bit of that to me that seems to add up, and that would give Russell Wilson a real landing place. Because honestly, when I looked at the market, we talked about this with Alan Saunders last week on the show. When you look at the market, I could see a lot of teams being like, you know what, we'll ride it out with Justin Fields for a year. Here's a 2-year deal. We'll see what he's got. I'm not sure how many teams do that for Russell Wilson right now, especially how the season ended. I think he needs a place that wants him, which is why I thought for a second, like, I could see him sticking around in Pittsburgh, because he might be like, hey, I'm willing to make it work no matter what. But with Pete Carroll in Las Vegas, their obvious connection is winning a Super Bowl together in all those years. I could see something happening there and him going in that direction. So again, none of that's concrete, but I just keep getting the feeling that Fields is the fit right now, and that he will help them keep building towards the team that they're aiming to become. Now, a reminder: Fields is not the projected future. He's still seen as the bridge, and there's a chance that he could grow into it. I always rule that into everything. Like, hey, I give guys the credit to be able to improve, and he can improve and become a franchise quarterback if he wants to. But for the Steelers, you can't put all your eggs in that basket right now. You have to keep building the roster that you want to build, so that if Justin Fields isn't that guy, which, reclamation projects really work out that way. But if he isn't that guy, you're prepared so that when, after this draft, if there's a good draft class in 2026, or if there's a major free agent opportunity for a franchise quarterback who's just, moving around like Matt Stafford did to the Rams, that you have a system in place where you could plug and play that quarterback and they're ready to take over. So I think that's a big part of the thing there. And the Steelers, they're still building that team to be ready for that. If it's whether it's a more developed Justin Fields who becomes like kind of how Jalen Hurts is for the Eagles, where he's not putting up elite passing numbers, but he's operating within a system that's winning the trenches and playing great defense. And then that's fine. But that's also building a system for whether that's a big free agent signing or a traded quarterback that they bring in that they think is the guy, or a high draft pick that their next Ben Roethlisberger. That team is going to be along the lines of how Andy Weidel and Omar Khan are trying to rebuild the Steelers and put them in that position. And that's what's going to make this. And that's why they brought Andy Weidel in, because they want to kind of build a team like how the Eagles have with Jalen Hurts right now. Physical in the trenches, tough, physical, play fast and hard on defense with playmakers assorted around where you can just distribute the salary cap in a good way. And that's where I think that the Steelers are headed. And as we pointed out, when we picked the Eagles to beat the Steelers way back when they were playing earlier this season, and this was when the Steelers were at their highest of highs, right? Like they were 10-3, I think, at that time. They were coming off the Browns win. They were in a point where it looked like, hey, they might win the division. They might be in conversation to get the 2 seed if they handle their business. And I was saying, like, one, the Steelers never win Philly. That is a curse. It's just a thing. But 2, Philly is well into the process. Like, they are several years into the process that Andy Weidel started them on when they were starting this project. The Steelers are like in year 2 of that with Weidel and Khan and trying to remake things. So I think we said all along that was not going to happen. And the Steelers aren't in that level of the Eagles to do that just yet. But if they want to get there, you can't divert from the long-term plan. You still have to keep investing in it. And I think you're seeing, by the way, how the playoffs have gone. There's several teams that when they win in the trenches, when they win with defense, when they play fast, there is a way to win and be successful and be a contender. It does not prohibit the Steelers from being there if they're able to build around it and continue to reinforce the things that I think they are building, which is why I think it's clear the Steelers should be looking at some serious positions during the Senior Bowl this week. I want to talk about which positions those are and some of the prospects I have my eyes on early on in the draft process. We'll talk all about that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, remind you, this show is also brought to you by LinkedIn. As a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means it's time to hire. You need a partner that works just as hard as you. That's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you click out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, and get qualified candidates all in one place. LinkedIn's new feature can help you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip. You can add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture. That will double your reach to qualified candidates on LinkedIn. It's no wonder that 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn helps them find high quality hires. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our show here. We talked a lot about the quarterback situation. Let's dive into some Senior Bowl talk. And again, this is just very early in the process for those who might not fully understand what the Senior Bowl is. It's just seniors in college football get invited to this opportunity. It's a tradition where the team there's 2 assorted teams that are kind of split up with all these players from all these different major schools that are projected to be higher draft picks in the NFL draft class, and some could be lower draft picks too. But the important thing isn't the Senior Bowl itself. The game itself is kind of whatever. The important things are the practices, and those will happen Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday this week. We'll be getting into those into those at that time. So with that, where do the Steelers need to build? What positions do they need to be looking the hardest at? And some people might say who hear that question, everything. They should be looking at everything across the board. But let's not forget, the Steelers were still a team that had a top 10 defense this year, an offense that finished in the middle of the NFL for the first time in 4 years, and they did make the playoffs. That doesn't mean the Steelers are Super Bowl contenders or they're close to becoming a Super Bowl contender, but it is a reminder that there are valuable pieces on this team to build around, and the Steelers should be making smart decisions to kind of readdress, add to certain positions, address their weaknesses, or even further bolster their strengths. So if you've been following this show, you know the areas that I've been talking about, who I think that are the biggest concerns. I think this team needs to address the D line. They need to address cornerback. Wide receiver still a need. Running back with Najee Harris, but pending free agent, that's still a need. And I still would not overlook offensive line or quarterback in this draft. Now, some people are going to say, well, wait a second. You have to invest in the offense. This has to be an offensive first-round pick. And yes, the Steelers do need to invest in the offense. But I think the investments this time around don't have to just be in the draft. The Steelers have been drafting first-round offense for a bit now. Broderick Jones, Zach Frazier, second-round pick, but still early pick there. Troy Fautanu. They've been trying to invest in the offense, and I think they're on that process there. But I think that part of what happens when people talk about how imbalanced the Steelers salary cap is, they're the most expensive defense, least expensive offense. This is your chance where this is a year where you can go sign some vets because you got some salary cap money to play with. You can go, again, cut Preston Smith, cut Larry Ogunjobi. You'll get yourself up to, I think, around $60-70 million in cap space. You can go get a really good free agent wide receiver. You can, if you want to get rid of Isaac Seumalo because you don't think he played well enough this year, you can go get a guard that comes in and fills in on your offensive line and be the veteran presence with all the young guys that you've assembled there. But you can add the more expensive pieces in free agency. And that allows you in the draft class to say, okay, if we can't invest in higher paying members for the defense, let's invest our draft picks in younger guys to make the defense faster and less expensive while developing them, because you still do have a defensive core that is good. And I know that people are going to look at the Steelers defense and be like, oh, well, they're not good enough. I'm not saying that they're elite right now, because they're not. But they are good. They're a top. When you're top 10, you're a good unit, and they do have leaders on that side of the ball that you can sort of teach down and pass on things to, and they're going to need that pretty soon, because I don't know how many more years they got left of Cam Hayward and TJ Watt and Minka Fitzpatrick in that crew. And they got some young guys too, like Patrick Queen's going to be around for a bit. Joey Porter Jr. looks like he could be the part. Keanu Benton certainly looked better. And there's and Alex Highsmith isn't old, so like they got guys, but this is where I think that they could get younger players, not have to spend as much on defense by drafting some defensive players in there. And at the Senior Bowl, there's going to be plenty of players who are going to be really good fits on either side of the ball. And I think, we'll start at cornerback, because I think that's a position that the Steelers should be looking a little bit harder at, because I think that they could use a really good pairing with Joey Porter Jr. When I just watch how the Eagles and the Chiefs play, their corners being able to stick with guys, play detailed, disciplined, aggressive football up and down the field. That's such a difference maker. You saw how the Eagles added Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean this past year in the draft. They are impact players right now, and they're playing a big factor. And there's one cornerback in particular who I think everyone's going to look at in this Senior Bowl week, and that's, I'm going to mess up his name, Azareye'h Thomas. Florida State, 6'2" guy, physical, fast, sticky in press man coverage. To me, he could be an ideal partner for Joey Porter Jr., particularly because, at least in the very early studying things, I am not going to profess like I've studied this kid up and down and seen everything that he does. But just looking at the way that he plays, he's physical, he flies, he's sticky, he's not going to back off. I could see him and Joey Porter Jr. being the aggressive 1-2 punch in the cornerback room, where if he comes in, they're both taller guys. They're both above 6 foot. They both like to be physical. They can both run press man coverage. That can allow you to do a lot more in your defense to have a guy like that. But Thomas isn't the only cornerback in this draft, in this draft, in the Senior Bowl, let alone draft class, but in the Senior Bowl week to look out for. Also guys to look out for: Trey Amos out of Ole Miss, Maxwell Hairston out of Kentucky, Jacob Parrish out of Kansas State. I think that there's plenty of guys here. Now, again, I want to make this clear. I've not had the time to do any of my deep dives on these players just yet. I'm amassing just information. I'm watching a little bit of film, but I haven't been able to log a whole lot of stuff. I'm still covering Pitt basketball for the Post-Gazette while that season's going on. I just got back from Syracuse yesterday. I covered them over the weekend. So this is the part of the year where I start gathering my film, studying the prospects, putting my notes together, and then eventually, when late March, early April comes around, we'll start to actually build our big boards, projections, and then we'll see where I think the best guys are for the Steelers to fit as we get to that part of the show. But early on, these are the days where I start collecting notes and putting things together. So there are guys that stand out to me, and they'll be the first ones I look at. So that's why I brought up Thomas first. One player that I wish was in the Senior Bowl, he was in the Shrine Bowl, is Kenneth Grant out of Michigan. He looks nasty as a nose tackle. He chases after guys downfield. He's big. He's athletic. I think he could be a perfect answer on the defensive lineman, on the defensive line as an A-gap nose tackle that just plugs right in the middle, will allow Keanu Benton to move to more like a traditional defensive end role. Keanu Benton hasn't been looking too good against double teams. When he doesn't get double teamed, I think he's a little bit more effective. And you having a guy like this in the middle of your defense could take the pressure off of him to do that, make Benton more of a traditional D end like Cam Hayward or Larry Ogunjobi. And maybe that's where he can thrive a little bit more. And then also, if you hit on Grant and Benton continues to work out, they become your 1-2 punch at DT when Cam Hayward retires. So that could work there. But make no mistake, even though Kenneth Grant's not in the Senior Bowl, there's still plenty of defensive linemen with interest. There's Deone Walker out of Kentucky, huge player at 6'6", 345. He'll be interesting to watch. But I'm also interested in Omar Norman Lott out of Tennessee, Shemar Stewart, and Shemar Turner out of Texas A&M. Now, I want to clear this up. This is going to be confusing because there's two Shemars and they both play for Texas A&M. Shemar Stewart is the higher rated prospect. A lot of people think he could go first round. In fact, Ray Fittipaldo, my partner, or not my partner, but he's one of our great Steelers beat writers for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. In fact, I'm gonna talk to him about his mock draft. But he had the Steelers drafting Shemar Stewart in the first round of his first 7-round mock for the Post-Gazette. We talk about that on the North Shore Drive. So if you want to see my conversation with him, check that out later out Monday morning. But Shemar Stewart, he's 6'6", he's 290. He's more of like an edge. He's not your traditional DT or even 3-4 D end. It would take some adjusting for him to fit, and that'd be a high pick to get him in the first round. There's Shemar Turner, though, who I do think is more of a 3-4 defensive end, played a lot of B gap. He's 6'4", 300 pounds, bigger guy. I could see him that. He's also more like a day 3 pick, at least projected right now. So I could see that working out. But there's other guys as well that could be lower down in the draft as far as defensive linemen. Aeneas Peebles out of Virginia Tech, Darius Alexander out of Toledo, middle round targets to keep an eye out. But at the same time, I'm bringing up all this defense. There's plenty to look at with wide receiver too, and I'm actually very, very intrigued by some of the guys that'll be there for the Senior Bowl week. Jayden Higgins out of Iowa State. Really like some of the things that he's shown. Xavier Restrepo out of Miami. Savion Williams, who just looks like a specimen with how tall he is. And Jack Beck, also both Williams and Beck there out of TCU. And then Tez Johnson out of Oregon. These are all guys that right now project to be like day 2 picks who the Steelers could look at if they pass up on, the obvious first rounders like Luther Burden out of Missouri or Emeka Egbuka out of Ohio State or Matthew Golden out of Texas, which again, I'm not against the Steelers going and getting one of those guys either. But if they want to be able to invest somewhere else, if they want to get bigger in the trenches, especially on the defensive side of the ball, you look at what the Eagles were able to do with their defensive front, to the Commanders. If you want to get those guys, that's where you're going to probably have to get them is higher up. And there's still going to be these guys who I've talked about: Higgins, Restrepo, Williams, Beck, Johnson. These guys, they're just some of the names that I think could stand out at the Senior Bowl. And if they do, they look really good. Another guy to watch who apparently was dazzling a lot of people, but it's a guy I know. I've covered him. Kanate Mumfield out of Pitt. To me, he was one of the sharpest route runners I covered in college football, and he was chewing people up at the Shrine Bowl over this past weekend. So do take note. That's another guy to keep a note of, but he won't be at the Senior Bowl. So I just threw a whole lot of names at you, from D-line to corner and wide receiver. We haven't even talked about running back, which is a need for this team right now, or whether the Steelers should be looking at guys like Jalen Milroe or Will Howard as potential mid-round quarterback picks if they fall far down enough. When do you take that shot? We will keep you up to date with all of those things and notes that we hear from the Senior Bowl practices as the week goes on. And in fact, we're planning on to have Nick Farabee on. He's going to be in Mobile, Alabama, covering the Senior Bowl for PennLive.com from the Steelers' perspective. I want to get his thoughts on what he sees, because oftentimes, it's the practices that are going to make or break things and set the tone for who these guys are and put them in better positions for when the combine comes around and then eventually when the NFL draft comes around. We'll keep you up to date with all of that here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. We got to take another break. When we come back, though, I'll give you some of my reactions to the playoffs and this conference championship weekend, which was wild. We'll get to all that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, to remind you, this show is also brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, endless possibilities. And there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl. Super Bowl odds have been opened up, and the Chiefs open as 1.5-point favorites over the Eagles, with the over-under set at 49.5 points. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com, and you can get started by just betting $5. And when you win on your first $5 bet or more, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our show. Let's get into the most predictable outcome of the weekend, which was the playoff results. Now, as said, at the start of the playoffs, I thought it was going to be Lions-Ravens. I thought this was the Ravens' year. I thought that this is the Lions' year. Lions got hurt up. They didn't make it to the conference championship. Ravens folded against the Bills. That was tough. But once it was Chiefs, Bills, Eagles, Commanders, yeah, you kind of saw this is going to be Chiefs, Eagles all over again. I have to say, though, I am impressed with how the Chiefs continue to win. Not that I think that they don't earn it. Not that I think that they're, it's just how Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid and this Chiefs team continue to win against top tier quarterbacks in close fashion. I'm not one who subscribes to the idea that they are benefiting from a conspiracy of the NFL to make them win. That's crazy. Now, I'm also not going to say that they don't get the benefit of some questionable calls and some huge moments. That's absolutely part of the case, but that's also what goes along with what great teams get. There's plenty of people that said that about the 70s Steelers. Steelers fans are right up there with saying that about the Patriots. Jesse James call, all those things, but that doesn't mean it's a conspiracy. It's just part of what happens in sports. Look to the NBA with LeBron, or when Steph Curry would get stuff. Penguins with Crosby. People used to accuse that Sidney Crosby of that. It just comes when you are great, and sometimes the calls are earned. Sometimes they're maybe not as much earned, but that comes with it. I'm not flabbergasted by any of that. I'm flabbergasted by how many times Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs can beat Josh Allen and the Bills. Allen is now 0-4 against Patrick Mahomes. He lost by 3 points this year, 3 points last year, 6 points in the 2021-2022 playoffs, and he lost by 14 in the 2020-2021 playoffs. But the last 3 times they played, it's been less than a touchdown that the Chiefs have found a way to beat the Bills. And this is supposed to be, he's supposed to be like the next up, like he's supposed to crack it and be part of the great quarterback era that they're in. Some people want to compare this to how Tom Brady used to beat up on Peyton Manning in the playoffs. And people remember those early 2000s games where Tom Brady would just dust up Peyton Manning, and Peyton Manning wouldn't look good and things would work out. But people forget Brady didn't have that kind of power over Manning. He won 2 games early in their career against each other in the playoffs. But after those early 2000s, when Brady beat Manning twice in the playoffs, Manning won the next 3 times that they faced in the playoffs. He ended his career 3-2 against Tom Brady in the playoffs. So even Peyton Manning not only got his get back a little bit, but he flipped the script on Tom Brady and didn't lose to him for his last 10 or 11 years when he was in the postseason there. It's also kind of crazy to me when you think about how the Manning family as a collective is 5-2 against Brady in the postseason all time. That's kind of insane to think about. But Allen losing again to Patrick Mahomes is something completely different than Manning and Brady or other things like that. I'm going to shout out my old beat partner on the Pit beat for the Post Gazette, and my guy Noah Hiles. I thought he made the best comparison when I was tweeting about this at the end of the game. He compared it to how Michael Jordan was for the Bulls in the 90s in the NBA. What's crazy is I feel like that's the most accurate comparison. People want to make football comparisons, but Mahomes is 17-3 in the playoffs right now. That is nuts. He already has the second most playoff wins in NFL history, and the only person he's behind is Brady. He's also not even 30 years old yet. He will be at some point later this year, but he's not. He's 29, and he is 17-3 in the playoffs. And he's not going up against cupcakes. He's taken down MVP level quarterbacks left and right against Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, and Joe Burrow combined, 3 other MVP level quarterbacks in his conference. He's a combined 6-1 against them in the postseason. That's not parity. That's domination. That's insane. And I know this is a Steelers podcast, and you're probably thinking, well, Chris, where are the Steelers in here? If the Chiefs win the Super Bowl this year, they will join the 70 Steelers as the only franchise, the only dynasty in NFL history to win 4 Super Bowls in a 6-year span. Nobody had done it. Not the Patriots, not the Niners, not the Cowboys, the Steelers of the 70s. That's the level of domination you've seen from the Eagles. And not that that's some shocking revelation that they're dominant, but it's just amazing that they're doing it in this way. And again, all these close games, that's the level they've already put themselves in with 3 Super Bowls. They're in those types of conversations. So I'm intrigued by how this Chiefs team has continued to find a way to win. And now they're going to be up against a team that they beat 2 years ago in the Philadelphia Eagles. And the Eagles, a team the Steelers are trying to grow to be like in the way that they're drafting, the way they're trying to build, the way Andy Weidl's assembling the roster. And like I said last Friday, you looked at that Eagles game. I looked at that Eagles Commanders game, and listen, I was talking to friends of mine who thought the Commanders stood a chance, and I'm like, look, I like Jayden Daniels. They're fun. Terry McLaurin, I love Terry McLaurin. I loved him when he was coming out the draft. I thought that was going to be awesome. But I said going into this game, the Commanders can't stop the run. They're third to last in the NFL. And sure enough, the Eagles rushed for 7 touchdowns. 7. When you do that, it opens up everything in the passing game. The Eagles were averaging 93 yards per playoff game. The 2 games prior to this one, Jalen Hurts threw for like 246 and a passing touchdown. Just immediately feeding off of the run game. I mean, first snap of the game, the offense for the Eagles was just a rushing touchdown for Saquon Barkley, who's just phenomenal. Maybe he should be the MVP this year. I don't know, but just looking at that, I was just astonished by this. This Super Bowl, though, between the Chiefs and the Eagles, a rematch here. This could be a sign that the Eagles brand of football could be the wave of the future in the NFL that finally brings an end to the Chiefs' reign and maybe signals that more teams that build like them could be the future, because everyone right now is looking at the top tier quarterbacks. And as good as Jalen Hurts is, he's not in this class. He's not in the class with Mahomes, with Allen, with Jackson, with Burrow. They're just not there. And even other guys in the NFC, like, he's above Jared Goff. Like, you say that, I think that, Matt Stafford, I'd still say is above him. I don't know how much longer he has to be in that category, but like, you look at the NFC, it's not the same. They need to build this way. But when I look at how the Eagles have built themselves, they've kind of built themselves like, hey, we don't got the superstar, ridiculous quarterback that can make every single play all the time. And just do ridiculous things. So we're going to build a team that can do ridiculous things and win that way. So this could be the time that it ends the Chiefs' reign, stops them from being the first three-peat team in NFL history, and gets them in that conversation. Or it could end with Patrick Mahomes just being Thanos, snapping his fingers and winning his 4th Super Bowl, as everyone asks, will it ever end? Will anyone ever stop him again? Because Brady, it's crazy. He's lost 3 times in the playoffs, 1 to Joe Burrow, twice to Tom Brady, once with the Patriots, once with the Buccaneers. And of course, that Buccaneers one was when like Patrick Mahomes' whole offensive line died. But this is that chance. Now, again, the Eagles didn't get to be at the point that they are overnight. It took them years of building. It took them building in the trenches first, adding playmakers around, having the right kind of athletic quarterback that played into it, and finding that right chemistry. If the Steelers ever want to be a team that plays fast and aggressive and wins more often against bigger teams like the Eagles have this past year, they have to stick to the process. They have to stick to drafting O-linemen. Well, maybe not this year, not O-line, but drafting in the trenches, strengthen up the defensive line so that they can win in the line of scrimmage a lot more. Get guys who can play faster in the secondary so you can be more aggressive. The way that the Eagles were, and honestly, the way the Chiefs were too. The Chiefs also aren't no push arounds. Like, that's the thing about this matchup that I think is gonna be really interesting. The Eagles ran through the Commanders because the Commanders are a defense that you could run through. The Chiefs are not like that. Chris Jones and that defensive front, they're going to be bringing it, and they can trust their corners to live on islands and to play physical and to play tough and force Jalen Hurts to have to beat them, on his own. This is going to be, I think, a really exciting matchup between these two teams. I can see this going either way, but I think that if you want to be a team that challenges something like that, you got to get into making sure that you're nasty up front, that you can be that identity. And right now, the Steelers, they did not finish that way. I think they have the core, they have the potential, but they got to add to it. That's why I think that the defensive trenches are very much an early priority in this draft. It's why I think cornerbacks are priority in this draft, because they need to get young guys that are going to embrace that mentality, not cost them a whole lot to do it, and be part of the plan moving forward. But we will keep you up to date with all of that plan here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. That's why we're looking at these prospects in the Senior Bowl. That's why we'll be taking a closer look at all these guys as we continue the NFL draft process, and we will be going back, basically, we will forming opinions here, giving you our insights here, and then also comparing it to our guests as they amass their information. This is part of where the speculation comes in, as far as how the Steelers build to be the team that they want to be in the long run. That's why we're here every day for you on the Locked On Steelers podcast. We keep you covered all throughout that. I'm your host, Chris Carter. You can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, all the social medias at Carter Critiques. You can read my work in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette at post-gazette.com. You can find me here every Monday through Friday on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes. We're back tomorrow with more on your Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.